Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on the recent court decision of South Dakota versus Wayfair. Exciting times within the affiliate marketing industry for sure. Our special guests today include Gary Keibel, who is a partner in many groups, more groups than I could list, Gary, at David and Gilbert. And I know that you've been in the industry for so very many years. You're the general counsel for the PMA. You've spoken at so many different places, I've lost count. So we're very glad to have you with us today.
Sure, glad to be here.
In addition, Joe Sousa has joined us. Joe is with Fanatics Inc. Right now, he's the affiliate coordinator for so many different programs, and they've got so many that are so global as well. Joe, I know you've been involved in SEO and affiliate marketing since '98, so you are indeed one of the old timers. Happy 20th anniversary.
And well, thank you very much.
And you've built hundreds of sites in all sorts of different niches. So I know especially your barbecue one. We've been checking that one out lately as we just got a new barbecue. So
nice.
Yeah, we're enjoying it. So thank you.
It's a fun one to do research on.
Oh, I know. So. You have to test steaks. Your life is just so tough.
Yep.
And just for background information, my name is Janine Crooks, and I'm the Partner Acquisition and Development Manager here at AWIN. I focus primarily on AWIN US, but I work with all the different offices. I've been in the industry only 19 years, so Joe, you've got me beat by a year. But I've spoken all over, and I'm the person who's at AWIN been in charge of keeping track of all of the different activities and things like that have been going on with Affiliate Nexus and Economic Nexus and now SCOTUS, and oh my goodness, there's so much. So let's go ahead and get started. I thought perhaps we'd just take a few moments to just go over the background of Quill versus North Dakota, which back in 1992, the Supreme Court ruled that merchants had to have a physical presence in a state in order to be required to collect state sales tax. And that's what kind of has been governing everything in our industry ever since then. Since so many states realized that they were losing money to online sales, they started to use affiliates to trigger nexus, or a relationship that would require an out-of-state merchant to collect tax. When merchants started getting rid of affiliates, then they added economic nexus legislation, and some of those things were particularly creative. I think my favorite one was the one where, I think it was in Iowa, if you were on a plane that landed in Iowa, you established nexus. So there were some very creative economic nexus legislations that passed. South Dakota took the lead with passing what got nicknamed the Quill legislation a couple of years ago, and basically it was designed specifically to trigger a lawsuit, hoping that it would go escalate all the way up to the Supreme Court of the United States and encourage them to revisit the Quill decision, which is what has now happened. So, given that fact, let's take a look at the ruling of South Dakota versus Wayfair Inc., the big one we've been waiting on for months and years. To just kind of sum it up fast, and gentlemen, please correct me if I didn't read this all right, but basically physical presence is no longer required. A transaction instead is sufficient to trigger nexus. The court didn't feel that it was an undue burden to require out-of-state merchants to collect sales tax. They felt that smaller merchants were protected because of a threshold. South Dakota had a threshold in place. Many other states have a threshold in place. Some it's as high as 100,000, and others it's as low as $1. But ultimately, there were several issues that were not addressed in this ruling. So I thought we could have a nice discussion here about some of the different things that were covered and take it from there. So to begin with our discussion, let's start off, if you don't mind, from kind of a legal aspect, because, I mean, Gary, you know this for sure. These were some of the points that you shared with me. Would you like to elaborate on these a little bit?
Sure. So we've always had this Quill requirement. Physical presence is what is necessary to establish nexus with jurisdiction. And the most important thing from this Supreme Court case is that they're saying that physical presence is an arbitrary test, and that is not the proper test to establish a nexus. There may be lots of different reasons to figure out why someone has a nexus to a particular state. And I think they had said in the case that nexus is established when a taxpayer avails itself of the substantial privilege of carrying on business in that jurisdiction. So the court is saying a bright line test of physical presence is wrong. To establish nexus with the jurisdiction, it needs to be flexible in order to figure out what is sufficient to establish a nexus. And things such as in the South Dakota law and in the other nexus laws where it's a certain dollar amount or a certain number of affiliates or other standards, the court's saying those are the right standards to use. And you need to look at those in order to be fair, because of the Commerce Clause, we need to be fair in how we treat the interstate commerce. And what was happening because of the physical presence standard is that it was becoming radically unfair. And it penalized businesses in state, and it actually rewarded companies for trying to avoid tax and being out of state. And it was interesting that this opinion, written by some mostly conservative judges, were talking about the value of taxes and how important taxes are. And if we have a system which is incentivizing people to avoid paying taxes, then it's an unfair situation. And let me just back up 1 second, Gene, before I send it back to you. Everyone needs to be clear that whenever there's a purchase, there's a tax due, whether it's sales tax or a use tax. Somebody's required to pay the tax on that transaction. Typically what happens is when a merchant sells something to a consumer, they collect sales tax and remit it to the state. But if the merchant did not collect sales tax, it's the obligation of the individual to pay a use tax based on that purchase. Now, almost no consumers do that. People don't send money to the state based on their purchases in which they were not taxed online. So it's a reasonable basis for states to try and figure out how can we get these properly leveled taxes collected. And we're going to impose this obligation on out-of-state retailers to help us collect this tax if they have a substantial nexus to our jurisdiction.
Very true. That was actually even mentioned in the opinion written by Judge Kennedy that, people were not remitting their sales tax that they were owed to the state. So that was one of the reasons they had to make it even stronger, right? Did I understand that part right?
Exactly. And again, they acknowledge these taxes are due and they're not being paid. So the states should have a way to determine how to collect this money. And a Supreme Court precedent of physical presence as a strict standard doesn't work. So in order to enable states to collect this money they're properly due, they should be able to have a more flexible standard to establish nexus.
Okay. Yeah, it was interesting to kind of watch it. I mean, we've all been waiting on this decision for so long, and now to kind of see how this did come down, it was fascinating. I know, Gary, one of the things that you had also mentioned was that as a result of this, there was going to be a competitive advantage for some and a negative incentive for others. Now, was that some of the stuff that you were talking about before, or is this in addition based on the ruling?
Yeah, I mean, this came up, and it's interesting. Whenever the court, the courts always want to honor precedent, and especially a Supreme Court precedent. You don't want to just overturn it on a whim. So if you're going to overturn it, you can overturn precedent, but there's got to be good reasons to do so. Not just that you disagree with what happened previously. And so they did analyze a lot about the changed circumstances since Quill was decided in 1992. For instance, they talked about internet access. Mm-hmm. That, back then, they said less than 2% of Americans had internet access. Now it's 89%. So we have to look at that all these out-of-state retailers using online methods to engage in commerce, that just didn't exist in 1992. So maybe at that time, a physical presence analysis made sense. But now we've created this, you've used this precedent to create a competitive advantage for out-of-state retailers. Mm-hmm. And again, the properly due tax is not being paid, and these out-of-state retailers have a competitive advantage, and you're incentivizing people to stay away from a physical presence in order to avoid an obligation to collect this tax. So, the court did look at the reality of life today in 2018 to justify overturning this Supreme Court precedent.
Well, it's so true, how the internet has grown and stuff like that, all the money that is going through there. It's interesting because I think, too, as I'm watching people get excited about the tax, obviously all of the tax collection agencies, so to speak, are just drooling over this. And there's a lot of articles that are showing up all over the internet of them fighting over how they're going to spend this new, plethora of money, this new source. But I don't think a lot of consumers realize that they're going to be the ones who are paying this. It's not that it's not going to be Wayfair now that's paying the tax. It's just Wayfair that's collecting the tax. So
correct. Yeah, correct. It'll be passed on, and 81-year-old Justice Kennedy threw into his opinion that, hey, let's not say it's such a big burden. I'm sure there's software out there to help calculate sales tax and process it and have it remitted properly. They also, I always like looking at particular quotes in the decision. I liked when he said, it is essential to public confidence in the tax system that the court avoid creating inequitable exceptions. So what they were saying is, because of our Quill decision, we've created a system that's unfair, and we need to remove that requirement so that the system becomes more fair.
Okay. Well, that makes sense. Yeah. There's right now, I guess that's part of why I also think, though, about what the minority opinion was, because in there, they're thinking that it's supposed to be, Congress who takes this on. Because I've been trying to read what some of the states without taxes have been talking about. And that's one of the things we had discussed, too, what the next steps were going to be for the court, for the states, and for Congress. So I know you had some ideas on that as well, Gary. And Joe?
Yeah. So, sure. I'm sorry if I'm dominating here a little bit. Maybe we'll, pass over to Joe at some point, who has to deal with this on a daily basis. But understand what this opinion does. What this opinion does is it gets rid of the physical presence bright line rule, and it sends the case back down to the lower court to now decide if the South Dakota law is constitutional. Now, chances are it will be, based on this ruling, but the case is now remanded, and it goes back down, and now they'll rule on the issue about the law. And, you'd certainly expect that it's going to rule that, well, if Quill is no longer the rule, the law of the land, then the South Dakota law is fine. So that's probably what's going to happen. What the ripple effect from that will be is all these other states that, and I think we have, 30-something states that have these laws.
Yes.
They're going to re-examine their laws in light of this and say, are we good with the new standard that's been set forth by the Supreme Court, or do we need to change it? And then you can bet that the remaining 15 states or so that don't have nexus laws are going to say, oh, now the door's been opened, so let's go ahead and do it and put a law in place. Now we'll have 50 different state laws dealing with this issue. And at that point, you may hope that Congress steps in and develops one national standard. Otherwise, it will be a bit complex for out-of-state retailers to be dealing with this in all the different states.
That's one of the things that I was looking at. Like, for example, right now, and I don't know all the technical legal terms on it, but I know that, for example, New Hampshire has actually already posted something or filed something, because as a state, they don't have a sales tax. That's one of their claims to fame, is that they don't have a sales tax, and they feel that it's an undue burden on their e-commerce merchants that live in that state to be forced to collect sales tax for all the other states when they don't even have to collect it at home. And so, they're trying to fight it already based on this decision, and as far as they're concerned, SCOTUS got it wrong. So it's going to be interesting to see what's going to happen, because there are 5 states that don't collect sales tax, but are now going to be forced to collect it in the other probably 45. I had to laugh because as soon as this decision came out, New Jersey was actually still meeting as a legislature, they had one of the latest closing dates of any of the states in the US, and they ran through a bill, like literally on the last day, so that they could start planning on collecting this money for their 2019 budget. So there was already legislation in place, to start collecting based on the South Dakota versus Wayfair decision. So it'll be interesting to see. Do you have any insights into that or any senses on that where states that don't collect sales tax might have problems with what's going on?
No, I don't have any specific knowledge, but I do think they're all now going to revisit it and look, if there's money to be had, states will try to figure out a way to get some of that money. And I do think it's going to make things more complex on the state level. Mm-hmm. I think Congress with midterm elections is unlikely to deal with an issue as sensitive as taxes on this issue. So probably nothing will happen between now and November or now and January when the new Congress takes over.
Right.
But I think something will eventually be needed on the federal level because it's just going to get very, very complex on the state level.
Indeed. Do you anticipate then, I mean, you were just explaining the process of how now this is going to be sent down to the lower court in South Dakota, and then the ripple effect will have something happen in the rest of the states. Do you feel then that, for example, in a lot of the states where they've got an affiliate nexus or click-through nexus legislation in place, that's now going to be either rescinded or replaced, so to speak, by something that's an economic nexus that says you sold something to somebody in our state, therefore you have to collect sales tax? Is that how that's going to work?
I think a lot of the existing state laws are going to stay as is or just get minor tweaks because the Supreme Court's basically opened the door to say, come up with a standard that makes sense. It doesn't have to be based on physical presence, and if the standard makes sense, in order to be fair, that's fine. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what a lot of the states already have now with dollar thresholds and number of sales and affiliates. They've come up with some standard that's not arbitrary, and I think that will probably be enough to survive any scrutiny.
Yeah, because I'm thinking that all the affiliate nexus legislation where they use the actual physical presence of an affiliate in that state to establish nexus, now it doesn't mean anything anymore. The physical presence isn't required. So, go ahead and work with those publishers because they're not going to hurt you anymore.
True. You can focus now more on the dollars and the number of sales.
Mm-hmm. And so then from a congressional approach to this, what do you kind of anticipate Congress might do? Just let it be until the need comes up to try and do it at a federal level? Or, part of the challenge is that there's so many different thresholds. I went through and made a spreadsheet of them all. And, for all the states that do have some sort of an economic nexus legislation in place, it's all over the place. Sometimes is it $10,000 in a year, or is it $100,000 in a year, or is it $250,000 in sales in a year? But it could also be 200 transactions in a year, And then with others, as I said before, a single dollar or a single transaction establishes the necessary nexus that you have to collect taxes in that state. So, there's so many possibilities here. I can kind of see where, Congress is trying to figure out what to do on it because they've got to try and find a way to make all 50 states happy, or at least most of them somewhat happy, because nobody's ever going to have everybody happy. But, at the same time, it is such a mess. It's so complicated trying to work with this.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And look, Congress is only going to step in if, there's enough, support from the individual states and they can find a way to do it in a non-controversial manner.
Okay. Well,
I think, Janine, one thing you said, trying to make every state happy. I think that's going to be the problem for Congress, because as soon as they try to pass something, some state's going to come up and say, well, hey, this doesn't work for us. Another state, we don't even have sales tax. Why are we, like you said, with New Hampshire, why are we doing this? So I think it would be nice to have one overarching solution from Congress, but practically it's hard to see that coming through.
Totally. Could not agree with you more, Joe, because, I was kind of refreshing myself on the 4 bills that have been submitted to Congress so far, and every single one of them has drawbacks, even in light of this current ruling. There's something that, this works for these 26 states, but not for these 12, kind of thing.
Yep.
And those 12 are not going to go quietly into that good night for sure. So I'm not holding my breath on Congress acting on this, even though it sounds nice to have something that's, big and global and countrywide. There's just too many differences between all the states. So,
Yep.
all right. Well, Joe, I'm glad you jumped in here because one of the things that you and I had talked about a little bit was, kind of the merchant's perspective, because a lot of things have now changed for you as well. So, how do you feel now? In the past, had Fanatics, for example, not worked with some merchants or publishers in certain states because of their location?
Yeah, in the past, we did. I remember 4.5 years ago or so, when we hired our first employee in California. Like as soon as they announced it, we were on the phone with our tax people saying, "Hey, can we work with California affiliates now since we have Nexus?" Yes. So we were excited to turn on California there. But over the years, as our company has grown, for the most part, we were collecting tax everywhere anyway. I mean, we have offices and facilities in like 12 different states. We have relationships with a lot of the state schools, which there was just a lot of things going on where it made sense for us to just start collecting tax in most places. We still had a few holdout states, I think Kansas and Arkansas and Connecticut and Rhode Island. But for the most part, when this ruling came down, we just turned on collecting tax everywhere.
Okay.
We were moving that way anyway, but I think it just made it easier on our accountants to deal with it that way rather than figuring out which states we do and don't and where we can work with people. So from our perspective, this ruling didn't change a lot for us. I understand smaller merchants and other retailers. There could be some pretty significant changes here in how they work with affiliates and how they don't. Ultimately, I think one thing to keep in mind is the laws are still there in all these different states. They haven't changed yet. In a year or two, that could all change and there could be a different solution. But all these affiliate laws and everything they're still in effect. So it'll take the states overturning those or writing up something new or moving to an economic nexus to really make any major change. So for now, it's something to keep watching and keep an eye on and keep informed.
Right. So really, I think that's an excellent point. So Gary, kind of backing up to what you were saying before, keep following whatever the existing laws are now until the respective states have changed to their new legislation, right? That's how you can stay compliant.
Yeah, and I think I would add that, maybe in the past, you looked at a state that you weren't physically present in, you looked at their nexus law, you said, well, I'm not really going to bother with it. There's a lot of uncertainty. Now I think these states are going to get more aggressive because now they know, my law's good, or at least it's most likely going to be good. So you're not going to have much of an argument that my law is invalid. So I want to go out and get this money. So I think you're going to see state tax departments start to flex their muscle and try to collect more money.
I think it was 3 or 4 years ago, there's one of the states that passed a nexus law, and they came to us and saying, hey, you owe us all this money. And we said no. And that was pretty much the end of the conversation. I mean, these states passed a lot of these laws, but they never had any teeth behind them, or they never did any enforcement or even follow up on most of them. But yeah, like Gary said, I think with this ruling, states are going to be a little more aggressive in enforcing their laws and making sure they collect what they feel is due to them.
Right. Yeah, because, one of the things where I said before, some things were not necessarily addressed in this ruling, part of that is retroactive taxes. Where are they going to say the line in the sand started, in 2015? It started in 2018 as of, June of 2018. But, probably for the safety of most of the merchants, if they're going to start collecting taxes, start doing it now, as opposed to, waiting until the law changes in your state, because they could say, you've known about this, or it became law of the land in June. Am I on the right track here, Gary? You're the lawyer, not me.
Yeah, they're not going to be as forgiving with people that say, well, I didn't know that this applied to me, and I didn't realize I was supposed to collect. They're going to say, yeah, nice try. You're in the middle of this industry. You know how much of an issue this is. You know about the Supreme Court ruling. So, time's up. You got to comply.
Mm-hmm. Right. Right. It's going to be interesting to watch, because I mean, the other bullet point that I've got in here is issues with collection or remittance. Now I've got to imagine, Joe, your company is so huge that it's probably
Mhm.
not a killer for you guys at all, just kind of reorganization a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I was talking to our tax accountant today
Mm-hmm.
about this, just kind of learning how the process, because I don't even know how they handle all that.
Mm-hmm.
And just the process she was explaining, it was way over my head. But I mean, they have a software solution that hooks up to our cart that
Mm-hmm.
collects the tax, and it goes to a third party accountant, and yeah, it's not an easy process.
Right.
There are solutions out there that can help, especially some smaller merchants,
Mm-hmm.
but it's still going to be a mess to try to collect everything. And I mean, especially when you start talking about states with 58 different cities with their own taxes, and even
Yes.
school districts and transportation districts with all these different. I mean, it might be 8.1% somewhere and 8.2% across the street.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where the complexity is going to come with all this collection and remittance. If it was just a flat 7% in this state, 6% in this state, 5%, if there
Right.
was 50 different rules, that wouldn't be that bad. But when you start getting into, I think there's 2,000 different tax districts, that's where it's going to be. That's where the burden comes in on smaller merchants.
Oh, definitely. Actually, the last estimate that I heard was that there's between 12 and 20,000 different taxing authorities in the United States. I know that here
Wow.
in Colorado we have 450. So, there's this huge number. And I mean, that's part of the reason, I don't know how much the court took a look at this, but for the smaller merchants, that means that they could have to issue, if they were really successful, not so small anymore, 12,000 checks a month. They'd have to
Yep.
fill out 12,000 reports a month, and they would be subject to 12,000 audits. And that's a whole lot of stuff to go on there. So, it's the burden's going to be interesting. It may help us to see, kind of whether this threshold that each state is choosing, sometimes it's going to be sufficient, sometimes it's not. I know for us as a network, one of the things that we do recommend from AWIN is that people do, if it's a smaller company, where they've got, 12 or 20 people or something like that on staff, and they can't really afford to bring someone in to strictly do state taxes. There are some good places to outsource to. We have some that we've vetted, and at the very end, I'll be sharing my email address. Anybody who'd like that information, I'll be happy to share it with you on who we recommend to our merchants to do that, because it can be overwhelming. I mean, yeah, there's software out there, but somebody's still got to kind of monitor the software and ultimately mail the check.
And you have to pay for the software too. So
Yes, you do. And it's
yeah, I mean, I'm thinking of, there's a merchant, he makes an accessory for barbecues, and
Mhm.
it's just a little two-man shop
Yeah.
who's making these things. And how's he going to handle all this? How's he going to know where to send the payment? I mean, he probably won't reach most of the thresholds in some of these states, but even the smaller ones where there's one sale and
Yeah.
that hits the threshold,
Yeah.
yeah, that's a huge burden for small sites like that.
I mean, I don't want to take it to one step too far, but it's not impossible to think that there could be some small merchants who say, we're not going to sell to somebody who lives in South Dakota because we don't want to, we don't have to want to worry about having to collect and remit their sales tax. So, no sales to the
Yeah.
state. Kind of the reverse Quill, where Quill was you only collect taxes if you're in these states. Now it's going to be, reverse Quill. We can't sell to you if you're in these states, for the small guys. So it's, some stuff was resolved, a lot of stuff wasn't. One other thing too that you brought up that I thought was really interesting, Joe, was is sales tax really an issue for online shoppers?
Personally, I don't think it is. I know the PMA did an online shopping survey. I think it was last year, and people were listing why they shop online and what makes them want to purchase. And sales tax was less than 1% of a deciding factor. People were looking at selection, variety, it's convenient, it ships to my door, it saves me time. Issues like that were driving people to buy online, not I don't have to pay $2 in sales tax on this item. So that's one thing that's kind of bugged me about this whole Main Street internet is hurting the small Main Street retailer. Tax isn't the issue there. It's convenience. It's you don't have to drive down and park and go into the store and haul the thing home.
Mm-hmm.
It can just get delivered right to your doorstep, and you can be sitting drinking a cup of coffee and watching your favorite show, and you get whatever you want. So I don't think the sales tax is going to affect how many people are buying online or what they're buying online all that much.
Okay.
So I don't think merchants need to be that scared of losing sales because of this.
Right.
I know, talking to our tax accountant, she didn't have any specific numbers, but I know we've done some testing in the past on whether sales tax has an effect on people's purchasing habits. And I think our results, I don't have any of the numbers in front of me or anything, but if I remember right, it was pretty insignificant.
I think you're probably right for most things. I mean, it's unless you're buying something that's super expensive, and not
Yeah.
going to all be the same. So I don't think it's going to be that big of a difference. For me, it's always
Well,
take a look at the price and take a look at the shipping. That's the one that makes me.
Yeah. I could see states without sales tax. I mean, like Oregon or New Hampshire or wherever, people there might think differently about it. Because like if they're looking to buy a $2,000 grill, you can buy online, and I mean, so I think things like that would there might be some differences in those states, but I don't think it's a huge factor overall.
And now, as you're looking kind of towards the future, like you said, you can go ahead and just start working with affiliates in all of the different states now because that's not really an issue. Are you seeing other opportunities perhaps, or, what does the future look like for you now that affiliate nexus kind of isn't an issue anymore?
Well, I mean, once again, it just opens up a larger affiliate base. I know there's still merchants that aren't working with people in California, New York, and Pennsylvania. And those are three of the biggest states that are out there, and there's some huge affiliates that are based in those states. So it's going to open up a lot more opportunities in the affiliate space. Once again, it takes the affiliate nexus burden is off the merchant now. Now they got to deal with the state tax and remit and all that. So it's kind of moving the burden from one place to another on the merchant side.
Yeah.
But I think it does open up a lot more opportunities. We don't have to reach out to somebody and talk to them and say, oh, wait, no, you're in Kansas. I can't work with you. Sorry.
Yeah.
No, we can just go and set up deals with whoever we want and be able to work with them and not end up looking like a fool because we got that far into it before thinking about what state they're in.
Yeah. I know it's been interesting to watch kind of some of those things in the past because I mean we've been living with this for over 10 years as it being part of the the guillotine, so to speak, hanging over our heads with some of the merchants. So that's been interesting on it. So yeah, I mean to me it's like opening up all these opportunities. I kept trying to tell merchants along the way that if you've already got nexus in place because of economic nexus, then don't be afraid to work with a publisher that lives in that state because you've already are collecting sales tax. So, might as well at least pick up the affiliates and get some more sales, So anyway, it makes it interesting. I'm going to toss this out to you guys because I know, Gary, from a legal standpoint, Joe, because I know you're such an international company as well. Did you feel like there were any international components in the ruling? I didn't see where it was particularly addressed, but what would you say to somebody who is a merchant that's based perhaps in the UK or in Germany or something like that when it comes to collecting sales tax?
Yeah, I mean, the ruling itself did not really get into international sales tax international issues. And forgive me because I don't deal with international taxes as much, but there are different tax treaties between different jurisdictions. So, there is the possibility that, folks outside the U.S. have to look at this as well. But that would be something they would want to check with their accountants.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's what we've been encouraging them to do is do that and, nevertheless collect the taxes because, you certainly don't want to be on the hook if they go retroactive. Is that what you guys have done as well, Joe? Or
Um, we've gone the route of opening distribution centers and offices in more localities around the world. So if somebody's in England buying something, it ships from England.
wow,
If somebody's in Germany, it's going to ship from Germany. If somebody's in Hong Kong, it's going to ship from our Hong Kong area. So we don't have a lot of issues with. I mean, there are some, and I don't know how they're dealing with it or how our accounting team handles that. But for the most part, we've been trying to get a physical presences in more countries and more locations. Probably some of it is to simplify import taxes and
sure.
sales taxes and things like that. So.
Oh, I know. There's 11 gazillion rules that we're all dealing with on a daily basis. Makes it fun.
Luckily, I don't deal with them. The accounting team deals with that. So.
That's exactly how I feel about it as well. The one last thing that I wanted to kind of bring up that I didn't see anything about in the ruling, but has been kind of increasing as an issue within our industry is for marketplace type sites. So sites like eBay or Amazon or Etsy, where there are individual sellers that are on there. So kind of the third party sales are handled through a major site. Did you feel that there was anything in the ruling that referred to that, or do you think that's going to still remain separate legislation at a state level? Like Minnesota has passed something for it that goes into effect on July 1st, 2019, requiring marketplace sites to also collect sales tax. So any insights into that or thoughts on it?
It's probably more of a factual analysis than some requirement from the Supreme Court ruling. They're going to look at the structure of the relationship and who's involved and who is, under that applicable state law required to collect the tax. So, there can be many different structures that are set up, and someone's going to have the obligation.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to figure out, based on the state law in that state, who has the obligation to do so, and the other parties involved will want to make sure that their partners are compliant.
Yeah, it's gonna get interesting on that. We're watching so many things that are happening, in the industry right now. I'm gonna go ahead and just move on to this next slide. Questions. If anybody's got any questions, please feel free to just message them to me using the chat function, and I'll be glad to share them with Gary and with Joe. One of the other things too that I didn't think that they addressed specifically in the ruling on here was anything about some of the digital offerings, because a lot of states have been getting a little more specific on that. So digital downloads, things like Netflix and stuff like that, have also started coming in and finding their way into the proverbial economic nexus scenario. But it didn't talk about that at all here. It seemed like they kind of stuck more with physical goods. So did you have any insights into that or thoughts about those kinds of products? I think
that's a very good point, because digital downloads are treated very differently, and it depends on the state law, and that's a whole different bucket of state laws. I think a lot of states maybe have stayed away from that, but maybe, and this is just speculation, maybe they're going to feel emboldened that I can really tax anything I want that's coming over the internet into my state. So again, if there's money to be had, states may be interested. So it's possible they start looking into it.
Yeah, they're going after every penny they can, and now that gambling has a different approach to it, I know that they're starting to take a look at that as well. So it's going to.
Yeah, you could almost compare it to with marijuana. It's like that. I don't want marijuana sales in my states. Well, you could get 50 million, 100 million in tax revenue. Well, second thought, maybe it's not so bad now. That tends to happen when there's money on the table.
It's kind of funny how that works out. I live in Colorado, and we were, of course, the state that did it. And I could tell you some stories, and I can tell you exactly what might happen to my insurance rates for auto insurance. Not to mention some other things that have been going on. So for all those who think it's this wonderful plethora that's just going to, or that's not the right word, but that this wealth of money is going to be coming through, and oh goodness, I could have a whole talk on that as well, but that's a different topic. So anyway, I'm putting my contact information up here because before I mentioned that I am glad to send information to anyone about the company that we've vetted for it. And also, if folks want to get in touch with you, they can, email me and I'll reach out to you as well. Gentlemen, as we're kind of wrapping up here, do you have any kind of, parting thoughts that you'd like to share, stuff that maybe we didn't cover, or what you're most excited about or most concerned about?
I think I'm just hoping that out of this comes a better solution overall. I mean, I don't like there being so many different jurisdictions, each state getting to define all their terms.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I know that that's part of how this country is built, and that each state, I mean, interstate commerce plays a big factor in that. But I'm hoping it leads to a simpler federal solution, that Congress will see that, okay, this is a mess right now. It is a big burden on a lot of these merchants. Let's see if we can come up with a solution that works. I don't know if they can come up with a solution that works, but that's kind of where I'm hoping this ruling leads.
That would be nice. I like that idea because it's still pretty complicated out there.
Yeah.
How about you, Gary?
I think it kind of drives on the point that, the internet's a small place. We're all in this together. It really doesn't matter where you're located. This is the way business is done these days, and tax laws, like all other laws, are adapting, and you can't hide. So it's time to make sure that you pay attention to everything and make sure you comply, because the internet is not a different no man's land. It's the same as every other type of business.
Very, very good point. I think there are a lot of people who have been sitting out there going, yeah, well, catch me if you can, see if they can find me. Well, that's getting easier and easier every day. Yeah. Okay, great. Well, gentlemen, thank you so much. I really appreciate your joining us and sharing your expertise and your thoughts and insights today on this. Once again, if anyone has any questions for either one of our guests today, or if I can be of assistance, here's my email address and phone number, and I'll be more than happy to help you with anything I can. Thank you so much, everyone, for your time, and have a lovely rest of your day.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.